well, I think about many things, but in particular about materiality, representations of material, and whatnot. So this semester, Laida is teaching a seminar called Post Commodities. And they are also part of the cohort teaching the foundation studio for the first year, 3-year architecture students. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Laida. They're going to present some work, and then we'll have time at the end for conversation and questions. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Ellie. Thanks for the invite. Thanks for Ishan for helping us arrange everything and, you know, giving us the seat in the sky over here. I'm actually, I have a very well-known sort of fear of flying, so this is like going to definitely be therapeutic for me. It's great. Or I'm hoping it is. Okay, so as we'll start in slide 1. Yeah, thanks. So I have a practice called Stock Studio that I started in 2014, 2015. I'm going to say a little bit about the practice itself at the beginning. Next slide, Sean. So the practice sort of defines architecture as a temporary assemblage of objects and materials that are put in service of the event. Sort of these are both physical and digital objects and materials. And I generally do it through a kind of consideration of temporary materiality and how temporal that is. So today I'll be covering sort of 3 approaches I've taken to this notion of temporary material. I think it's important to note that prior to architecture, I sort of designed stages and props for a sort of music agency that was focused on touring musicians. So the touring aspect is key because it essentially made me not just interested in how things look, but also sort of how they come together, and even more so like kind of how they come apart, how easy they are to transport, and what are the kind of tricks and image tricks to reinvent these scenographies rather than kind of having to rebuild them every time, right? So this essentially points to a lot of the kind of methods I use in my work. Next slide. In terms of the content of my work, I'm generally interested in looking at what's kind of already around, the kind of latent oddities and mundane nature of the kind of products, materials, and resources that this kind of all this stuff that we've like chosen to make, how it becomes product, but also what are the kind of economies and frameworks that make these things either move around or exchange hands, as well as who kind of gets to have access to them. Next. It tends to sort of understand the material worlds, that my practice tends to understand the material world through multipliers, where sort of one thing times many, or one thing times often, or one thing times everywhere can actually constitute architecture. Next. So not just concerned with, say, a building, but the systems and of that cause these multipliers, this kind of networks of material proliferation and or multiplication. So ultimately on the kind of the small, the temporary, when met with a multiplier can start to constitute something like architecture or something like an architectural condition. So these are the models often represented by everything from like concert stages and how they modularize themselves and can be deployed, catalog architecture, IKEA, UPS, Alibaba, all of these, which deal in quantity rather than sort of one-offs. The work does tend to take a slightly kind of antagonistic, a sort of like punkish position towards this kind of commercial loops, or it tries to. Because it's sort of ultimately worried about the fact that the current culture commodity loop has created a sort of situation where like what is culture today is product the next, and trash the one after that. So it tries to circumvent that in some ways, and creating potentially other loops, ones that either benefit less usual suspects or maybe foreground culture in a more interesting way than like sort of say profit. And so something like using commodities to platform culture rather than culture to promote any single commodity, let's say. Next. It tends to function within an aesthetic low-hanging fruits. I think the reality of it is that I'm a sort of solo practice, and there's a kind of economy of labor that I engage through kind of picking what's around me and being economic with the sort of say, for example, like software efforts that I engage. So it tends to deal with like the found image. It tends to deal with sort of low-hanging fruit techniques, collages, easy kind of like videography, GIFs, this kind of items that don't require a kind of huge learning curve. So again, both the content and the methods tend to point to sort of what's around and what's easy. So this kind of focus on the temporary material assemblage, as I said, I look at it in three ways: through reuse and assemblage, through resurface, and through returns. So I'm going to start by presenting a kind of like reuse project. It's a project in like a few parts because it has evolved. I think with like, as with like a lot of my practice, you will see that it's oftentimes it feels like it's like a single project that mutates into seven, and projects that I'm kind of constantly working on. There's oftentimes no sort of end and start and end date, which is, you know, maybe a interesting thing that we could get into. But so this project's called A Kit of the Sum Parts, a budget gym. It was a project I did in 2019. It's an exhibition, a video game, and a public programming schedule at Materials and Applications storefront in Los Angeles. Next. It's a temporary architectural assembly in service of the activity. In this case, the kind of activity of working out. Next. It co-ops the formulas of kind of concert rigs or rentable event tents. So think your kind of wedding tents and outdoor venue stages. Now we're so familiar with this typology, but yeah, we're kind of next, where poles, panels, tension straps, and tarps complete otherwise very generic structural frames. Next. The project intertwines a few kind of custom elements with generic ones and images with budget materials to provide a set of parts that ultimately kind of come to form a gym. Next. It was it came through as a kind of collaboration with the company that makes the stock itself, the aluminum stock, which is a company that has usually done a kind of under rigging for shipping companies, specifically sort of like UPS, and shelving for light manufacturing, that then kind of created a relationship with me where, you know, they kind of let me do things with it, and we kind of collaborate on color and cuts and certain kind of bracket designs, etc. The project itself turns to kind of material diversion tactics from like DIY cultural production. So this is where my sort of background comes in, where I learned often low budget material assemblies are re-aestheticized and reassembled over and over to serve future events. Next. Reusing the same materials over and over, reprinting on top of the last print, repainting them, somebody else borrowing the kit. All of that sort of here becomes both an accessible approach to aesthetic renewal, as well as a proposal for a kind of more future-minded construction sort of assemblage tactic. Next. The project rests on the straightforwardness of its base structure, the sticks, and it instead focuses its design agency on developing kind of non-invasive attachment methods that allow for the easy dismantling and redistribution of these parts, that ultimately make the kit be able to serve future or different uses. Next. The project proposes assembly rather than construction, using rather than owning, refinishing rather than repurchasing. There should be a video playing. As ways of creating an architectural kind of kit that equally considers its own futurity as well as its aesthetics. Is it having trouble, Misha?
Yeah, the video is not playing.
I see. Okay, well, this is a video of 3 of my friends from my early 20s working out at the gym. This was the sort of like opening day. There's like 3 types of workouts and music playing. You can put yourself there.
Did you curate the playlist?
What's that?
Did you curate the playlist? The music?
The music?
Did you select?
I did it beforehand, yeah. For the show, you mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was kind of terrible music, actually. I have to admit. Okay, next. The kit includes, the sort of like the structural steel system, foam padding, water weights, tape, tarp, ratchet straps, shims, inflatable dunnage bags, sandbags, and vacuum formed panels. So all of these are, they all kind of served an architectural purpose, although they weren't intended to be used as architecture. So the water weights serve as ballasts or weights, the shims as kind of foundation adjustments, the dunnage bags as furniture, sandbags as counterweights, in a way sort of, the kind of cheaper end of an architectural microcosm, which were all sort of strapped together and padded up, ready to be worked out in. Next. We can keep going. One more. Yeah, so I'm showing you some of the sort of details of the structure. Next. Some of the kind of surfacing work on it that was like, rubberized images printed on vacuum formed plastics to serve as panels or privacy moments within the gym. Keep going. The project was, as many of my project, conceived as a kind of prototype of that would be like one of many potentials. So I often think about the work as not having like a single moment of, again, as I said, beginning or ending, but also not a single version of it. And the notion that depending on who might be interested in this kit of parts, certain sort of aspects of it can mutate and be reprinted on and painted on in order for the sort of same material substrate to serve new themes, new events, or new sort of clients or new user groups, let's say. Next. It also included a kind of prototype for a video game where one could kind of customize these future versions that that were kind of seen in this slide before of the project by interacting with the catalog itself in a sort of space of, like, in a 3-dimensional kind of Excel, where you could kind of budget and choose from new sort of themes for the componentry and pick kind of your own version of this kind of kit of parts as you go. So ultimately making a kit of the sum parts, something like a demo kit, and turning the gallery space into something more like a showroom than, say, a gallery, a space of exhibition as we know it. So next, the project next traveled to Faida Arsenale, an exhibition that happened in the financial district in New York. It was like a video game exhibition, mostly video game based exhibition. It was for this project that the kit was actually sort of stripped down and exposed in its kind of more prototypical version of itself, and it went, in a way, it went kind of like backwards in time, really. Next. I'm not sure, like the maybe none of the videos are going to play, huh? There's a lot of video, but here we can see somebody from the New York One channel trying to kind of climb on it, as well as some sort of friends socializing and hanging out in it. Next. Similarly, we actually see Leah Wolfman, who you're familiar with, and the same reporter from New York One. So next, the project was on its way to another exhibition to become a sort of different version of itself that was now going to be themed around water, but it got stuck in New York because, you know, due to the pandemic, and that exhibition got canceled and will now actually be part of a different space with a theme to be disclosed. So although I'm putting the kind of water theme here, it's in the midst of being reinvented through a different theme for a different type of event and venue. Next. So the project has, in fact, expanded in two different directions. One, towards the one that I was kind of pointing to, this kind of a cultural front in that happens more in sort of institutional venues or spaces of culture production, as well as towards a kind of small like business of like furniture and deployable architecture, called someparts.parts, where we kind of see the website here. Next. Someparts.parts, the website is like designed around this joke that I've been sort of smitten with for a long time. And if you can see it, it says essentially TJ Maxx. It's making fun of like how brick and mortar it can be such a kind of mess of parts, really. And the joke, which is by The Onion, is that they redesigned their website to appear as messy as the sort of store itself. That's what the website was designed after. Next. So so this is a video of us kind of going through the website. The business itself is a kind of modular, small architecture, furniture business. And I say business very like sort of gratuitously, because it's not necessarily thinking through profit, but all it was looking for was the idea of sort of leveraging the gallery space in which it originated, through which deals in kind of an economy of exposure and more conceptual thinking, and transferring that onto like real factors and utilizing real constraints in order to develop the project. So idea of like a user group, client group. The next. So the project ultimately consists of this kind of like website and a set inventory of structural and auxiliary items that we've adapted to many potential scales and uses. Next. It obviously, I mean, not obviously, but as you can see here, it uses the modular deployable architectural kit developed in the GYM project, but now sort of presents it as having many scales and many uses, depending on what people need it for. Next. It proposes a more aestheticized yet less branded version of an already existing market of kind of event-based architecture and modular furniture, but to do so through maybe like less wasteful and sort of cyclical methods. Again, it relies on disassembly and budget customization methods like reprinting, cleaning, repainting, and retaping. Architecturally uses the same kind of non-invasive assembly methods, using nuts and bolts instead of nails, ratchet straps instead of glue, and standard sizes rather than custom ones. Next. The standard sizes are key because it allows me to do a sort of size-based search on any kind of given catalog and then apply it to the kit, right? So I can look up one by one in any catalog of any sort of material. And any of those objects can be kind of easily incorporated into the kit itself. Next. So I'm currently sort of streamlining this project to become very multi-scalar. Next. So it goes from furniture, as we saw before, all the way to a shed. Which again, as you can see from like most of my work is again concerned with not simply creating a single shed, but providing authorship variation and options that, although leaning on a kind of generic dimensioning, generic design, it can through material finishes afford personalization and individualization. Keep going. So this would be the kind of more generic version. Next. And through materials, it can kind of through materials added, through panelization added or finishes added, it can become next sort of one's own. So this one last example, I just put it here because we're kind of working on an exciting way to create gradients within the structure itself, and to create fluorescent coloring, which are sort of one of the ways in which we're excited this project to be, is developing forward. Next. Let me know how we're doing on time. So again, sort of simple corrugated plastic. This is conceived as a shed that can be added on to an existing single family home. So a kind of like attached like parasitic shed, which can be attached to kind of in a given window of a house, and then kind of affords an extra room. Next. So we can see here, there are this kind of few steps on the other side of the house that kind of create this that afford access to this parasitic shed. Next. Okay, I have a lot of examples here. This is more on the furniture scale of the project. Next. Next. And I just put this example here because it resisted representation. So in some way, maybe I'm interested in discussing it, but it's kind of it continues to be kind of part of the same project. Some parts for a performance. It was a design for a large venue that had also be sort of on tour and flat packed and easily on the move. It ultimately needed to be reduced to 5 check-in luggages for touring with, which became a project that was meant to be sort of scenographic. It was truly more of like a logistical project in disguise. Next. The project was a physical scenography for an experimental sort of multidisciplinary performance by composer Ash Fury. at the sort of well-known club of Berghain in Berlin. And the reason why, I mean, the place doesn't not allow any documentation, and therefore, so it was an interesting project to have and to document. So what you're looking at here is a sort of rendering that tries to, or a rendering sort of collage that tries to acknowledge the design of the elements that we created while being cheeky about the fact that there's 100% no photos allowed, and that is very much true, not just in concept, but in practice. Next, the project was this sort of physical scenography. Oh, sorry. It included sort of 13 performers and this kind of series of plinths that the performers could stand on. So they needed to be both accessible, comfy, durable, flat packed. So the materials involved are this like structure that and this is a cheeky joke for Tom, I do everything with now, and a sort of foam padding, as well as vacuum formed plastic to make look like something more like a stone or concrete that could fit right into the kind of character of the venue without providing us with the sort of material burdens of transporting like stone or concrete, right? So to do it through flatness or kind of hacked flatness and hacked weightlessness. Next. It's also put together through ratchet straps, no surprise here, and a series of kind of temporary kind of Velcro straps that hold the mats to the structure. Keep going, which we CNC'd and yeah, vacuum formed. Next. Next. Ultimately sort of temporarily tied together, objects to objects and objects to performers, only existing together for the duration of the actual performance. Next.
Laida.
Yep.
Where are those objects now?
They are in Lilith's apartment in Berlin.
They're still in Berlin, yeah.
Yeah, they are.
Yes.
They are. Yeah, they're moving soon to another performance, but yeah, they're still there.
Cool.
Next. And this is a project that has been in the works for a while now, but it kind of it's an example of my second category of material circulation when I'm trying to like show you, get out of the way, resurfacing, because I could be more interactive with the presentation itself. Resurfacing. So this project was originally for the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit. It is now going to happen at the VDL House in Los Angeles, or something like it is going to happen at the VDL House in Los Angeles, starting this fall. It's going to be more of a durational piece that is going to last until March of next year. Next. The venue, the VDL House, is a sort of modernist case study by Richard Neutra. But the idea here is to kind of use it's essential to turn my architectural practice into a resident practice that offers radical redecorating and resurfacing services to a general audience and constituency of the VDL. So essentially, the public is going to submit radical proposals for redecorating and resurfacing the VDL to the will of the kind of public imaginary. And we have selected kind of 4 constituencies that will be submitting ideas, and I will be essentially creating a combination of digital and material proposals out of those ideas. it will happen sort of like 75% digitally on a live model that will be available on the website, where the kind of public's ideas will become like real in the digital sense. And I will be kind of creating a series of mock-ups and details and material samples using the public's ideas in order to kind of further materialize the project, further like sort of realize the project, which will make it sort of like 75% digital and let's say like 25% material.
Laida, what format will the ideas that from the public take? Like, how will those be conveyed to you, and how will assuming that, if I understood correctly, the ideas that they're submitting are ideas for radical redecorating of the VDL house.
Yeah.
So like, what version of the house are they given in order to generate those ideas? And then how do they communicate them to you? Is it all text and image based?
It's going to be text and imageries. Yeah. And in fact, I think like in the language that I'm giving them, the idea is that they're, unless they give me a specific image that they've created, the notions that they give me of what they want should be almost like the first thing that comes up when you Google it, right? So just like telling them, like, unless you get very specific and you tell me I want this specific pineapple, it is potentially left to the open that unless they get specific, it could end up being any pineapple that I find in Google search as pineapple, if they just tell me pineapple. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it could be like the generic, yeah.
It's like a prompt in a way.
It's a prompt.
Yeah. Which
yeah.
means that you will interpret it in some way, whether that's having Google's algorithm interpret it, or or it gets interpreted through like what's available in the catalog of parts.
Yeah.
And what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. So I will add to that there's these 4 kind of constituency user groups that I've defined. I'm also giving each one a different prompt. So one of them is to create, and these are sort of like high school students, they are to create their own wallpapers. So they should give me a sort of like a drawing of something that they've created. And kind of material ideas, so they can just kind of name materials, but also provide me with a wallpaper. A series of artists that I'm constraining to whatever is available on Craigslist, on this sort of like free section for a while, so they have to sort of like dig around for a kind of body of material that would speculatively sort of be both like, even though the situation is not real, the constraint is still kind of interesting as when taken seriously. And the 3rd and the 4th one are still actually in negotiations with the directorship of the video. But so each prompt comes with a kind of constraint. But one of them is definitely going to be this kind of keyword image, that keyword word that can then be interpreted by me into a motif. I
don't want to sideline you but maybe one more question before you move on, because I'm super into this project. Like what do you expect? So it feels like what makes this project maybe different than the previous few that you've been showing us is the insertion of this kind of unknown element that in a way is a new source of found material for you. Is a little bit curated because you're designing a prompt and you're maybe like limiting the palette, but also could really like throw a curveball in a way to the work. And I'm wondering what what you see in that opportunity. Like, in what way do you see that, you know, shaping your work or pushing it into a different direction that maybe, because the past few projects that you've shown us, like, they're so tight, right? Like, they don't, like, the kind of the spaces in the work where you allow contingency or you allow provisionality or you allow, you know, the kind of unexpected to come in are more through program, like through the ways in which humans interact, but not actually show up in the material, tectonic, aesthetic, or image of the work itself. Anyway, I'm just curious, like, what you, like, are you some trepidation? Are you like super excited for it, or?
There is a lot of trepidation. I mean, but it's like, it's a very purposeful sort of like aesthetic, like uncorralling myself, right? Like I know that although it's like a practice that speaks of kind of like pluralities and a kind of like openness to versions and iterations, that it still has to unhinge like the authorship of that, and this is the project that does that, right? It's like it returns, the idea returns back to me, so it is ultimately me producing it, and my sort of handwriting and signature will likely be sort of all over it, but it's my attempt to open that aesthetic tightness up completely. So it's like that kind of like uncomfortable ground of like, yeah, it will be what it is, but still giving myself like, you know, as a hand on the final output. So it's a very restrained. I don't know if it's very, but it's yeah. There's a I have the hand on the leash in a way, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's after that other ingredient that yeah, the other projects don't have, that sort of openness.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah. Next, which is the same, it's the same sort of image, but yeah, it ultimately is interested in creating kind of like new loops between, say, like an architect and the audience, a new kind of like relationship, like almost like the audience is a client in a way, but also while at the same time steering the kind of boundary of a preservation project, which is what the VDL is. It's a preservation project, and offering up to the general kind of public imaginary, right? So if you're not allowed to, this is a place that you have to put on booties to go into, and so materially you are to affect no impact on it, and so I'm interested in the kind of power of image alone, and 3D image alone, and kind of that mode of engagement with the public to allow a new kind of intervention, even if it's just sort of in the imaginary and in the image space. Yeah.
You pause here and just transition into conversation and questions, or do you want? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want us.
Yeah. I'll just mention like the third part, and this is exactly what I thought was going to happen. The third part is like in material circulations that I'm interested in, is in the return project, which I think I've presented at the school like so many times, but it's what gave origin to my practice. It was like this like Instagram account called Stock, in which I like bought materials from big box stores on like a credit that I had of like $200. I took photos of them, and you can just flip through these, Ishan. I took photos of them, I staged them, I like collaged them, and then I returned them. So ultimately creating a kind of this representation project on the free, with nothing but sort of like receipts and a few, and like maybe like a dirty car really left behind. But I always love to show this project to students because I did this project while I was in grad school. And Sarah, the rest is history.
Yeah, and I would say,
so it's my namesake project.
But you may feel that you've presented this project a billion times, but 2/3, if not more, of the students in this class weren't here until this semester. So
Got it.
it's new to them. So I think it bears, yeah, it's worth showing. And especially because class about representation.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Do you want to say like a couple more words about the role of representation, like how you see that?
Yeah. So the project really just kind of deployed the kind of conventional commercial gimmicks, like product photography in a way, fetishizing objects through portraiture, studio lighting, and very kind of calculated backdrops. But what I like about it, it's like it offered it's co-opting all of the aesthetics of, say, like advertising and product photography, but offering no added commercial value, right? So no more or less cinder blocks were or flexible kind of PVC plumbing elbows were sold any given month because of stock. It was purely a representation project. My attachment to the project is on the framework of it rather than the particular aesthetic or like the representation project in itself, because it proposed ultimately a way of producing work through having very little access to actual materials or having very little kind of money to buy the actual materials. Because of the sort of abusing of the return policy, right? So as long as I returned it within 90 days, my balance was back to 200, I guess. And it reauthors the off the shelf to kind of create a new catalog of its own, right? Like it kind of invents a new catalog through this kind of scrappy, very resource limited approaches to the architectural project, which used commercial sort of loopholes and something called like reverse logistics. But I also like that representationally, each one of the images, it kind of oscillates between this kind of product photography, but also proposing sometimes like entire worlds out of it. So it can be full of scale and scaleless at the same time, as we can see maybe in some of the other images. Within this project, there's also one called like All Out of This One Thing. And if we go back, Ishan, which is kind of speculation on a project where like, what if you just had a single material to do kind of everything with? What if like, stucco would have to be like your tabletop and your, if you go to another image, your tabletop, your ground, your wall, your stair, your ceiling, like, could that be possible? Or do we define materials by the kind of use that they're gonna afford us, right? So the floor is one material and the ceiling is another material based on whether it provides tread or how easy it is to clean. In this project, it kind of disregards all other factors, and it assumes that you just have this one thing to work with, and what would it look like if you tried to do every surface with that?
I think this is an interesting kind of like challenge, or something that I see or practice confronting, which is like the translation of these kinds of effects that you've found in digital space out into the physical world. And I'm wondering, so like, I think it used to be the case, I don't think it really is anymore, but I think it used to be the case that many designers like used digital tools to produce near realistic representations of the physical world or abstractions of the physical world, right? So like architectural representation, I mean, this is a gross generalization, but much of architectural representation was focused on like hyper-realistic or photorealistic images of unbuilt space as a form of visualization of the future, or was used representation to abstract something down to a series of lines on a page that could be used as a kind of construction document, or a way of describing something through its dimensions and its geometry. now it's like we often, we all the time, most of us are actually like generating the thing in digital space and then trying to figure out how to translate that back out into the physical world.
Mhm.
And then maybe back and forth, right? Like ping pong. It's not one directional, but and so I think that's like that's something which is really present in your practice and also raises issues of scale, which I think this project does. But also when I see some parts moving from the scale of furniture to the scale of a shed, and in some of the representations of the shed, it seems like the structure just scales 3D, like just scales up and becomes like super fat, or I don't know. I guess what I'm wondering is like, so when you're working, well, let's just talk about the shed specifically, I guess. Like, and then we can maybe turn to some of the student questions. But I'm wondering, like, the off-the-shelf components don't scale, right? Like the aluminum structure
Does not scale.
does
No,
not-
it repeats when necessary for sort of structural congruency, but
you bundle it.
it doesn't scale up. No.
You bundle it. When you say it repeats, you mean you just use more of it more often?
Yeah, I'll use more of it. Yeah. Or there's a kind of there's a way in the kind of orthogonality of the thinking to meet at a crossroads of the kind of structure. Every time it meets in 3 directions, it becomes really strong. So that's why it continues to underline the orthogonality of the shed. So sometimes, even if it doesn't repeat, as long as it's 3 kind of sticks meeting in 3 different directions, it becomes actually a very strong corner. So that's, anyway, that's more of a shape conversation. Where does the shape come from? But
Yeah. No, but it's interesting. I mean, it's there's going to be like a constant conversation between like, I mean, maybe this is true in all of architecture, so this is a dumb thing to say, but like a kind of like tug of war or like give and take between like the quantity of aluminum tube required to structure the thing and its aesthetic and its representation, like its image.
yeah.
Because you like never in the work do you ever hide it, right? It's not something that you're gonna like bury within the thickness of a wall and cover with drywall.
Right. Yeah.
And so like the bigger the project gets, the more like
The more of them.
the more it becomes like about filigree and the less it becomes maybe about like a box, which is just going to be an interesting, I think, thing to observe in the work as it gets bigger.
Yeah. I think the thing that it has like a really difficult, what's interesting about the kind of structure is that it mostly introduces a kind of surface problem. Like which one wins? Is it the standardization of the sizes of the structure, meaning the fact that like all the sticks are, maybe Ishan, could we go to the shed? It may that the structure itself is also, it attempts to be cut only at like either at foot lengths, so that there's no things like 18 and a quarter cuts. It's always either like 6 inches. 6 inches is the only half a foot. Otherwise, it's just 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. So then it becomes about like which choice is more important. The fact that the surfaces remain kind of whole cuts for future reuse, right? So if somebody gives you a 4x8 sheet, that's very useful. If somebody gives you a 4x6 1/4, it's like slightly less useful. And the more and more idiosyncratic you get from there, the material reuse potentials of this kit right here that we're looking at become less so and less so. So there's in the project, there are kind of very big decisions about like which one wins over what, like what gets to be standard, so that something else kind of needs to give up a little bit. So we can see here, for example, like the windows are, they're a different dimension, that the kind of big planes on the front or on the side, but just even cutting that window, it already kind of ruined a nice piece of corrugated corrugated plastic, right? But so there are like this kind of interesting choices along the way, but it definitely like attempts to foreground or attempts to do the whole sizes only.
Right.
I don't know. That's not so much a representational conversation, but yeah.
That's okay. I know. That's my fault. I took us in a weird direction.
No.
But I think scale. I mean, scale is one which I think is really obviously important in terms of a conversation around representation. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I wanted to take a minute to maybe paraphrase some questions from the students. So for today, you asked them to read the first page of Munoz's, oh my gosh, why am I blanking on the title of the book?
Cruising Utopia.
Thank you.
Cruising Utopias.
Thank you. And Cyan Nye's essay on aesthetics and our aesthetic categories. So I think a lot of students had questions around just how we might think about aesthetic categories as Nye talks about them in terms of poetry or art, you know, like into architecture. Like I think architecture has a much more maybe like nuanced or complicated, I think, discourse around aesthetics because architecture has utility and has functionality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's kind of interesting to think about in relationship to your work because your work often is also thinking about functionality, although not in terms of optimization or efficiency, but just as an opportunity to think about how functionality or kind of interactivity might drive its arrangement or assembly in space. But like when you think about, so if Nye like identifies these categories like zany or cute or interesting, I just wonder like, like is kind of aesthetic categorization something that's important for you?
Yeah.
And like, how do you think about it? Do you think about it like vibe or?
Yeah, I think about it like I associate like even just going down like sort of her categories, like I associate the cute with like consumption and you know proliferation, right? Like cute things are sort of sold more and they kind of create just more of them. You know, I don't know, I always think about like Hello Kitty, like the kind of like the entire world that Hello Kitty, just by that kind of cuteness, has been able to create like an entire material world, right? Like it actually manifests, and in itself, that the consumption of that cuteness, I'm not getting like too statementy here, but that product alone like can create an entire material category that now like this kind of world needs to be responsible for, and like it's just more plastic and it's just like more stuff, right? So I associate the cuteness with consumption, which it's again trying to think about it like if we postpone the idea of like consumption as either good or bad, like in itself, like are there better ways of consuming cuteness? Are there better ways of consuming aesthetics? So that leads me to something like wallpaper, right? Like wallpaper politics are interesting, which provide cuteness and customization, homeliness, all of the kind of warmth and cultural expression that we might want from like a personal experience. But because it's added on as a more benign layer, and it doesn't sort of it doesn't have form and idiosyncrasies of like I don't know, like a teddy bear. It's simply kind of like a paper layer. You can remove it, and so it becomes a more benign cuteness that that creates less impact due to its kind of overconsumption, right? So we know we want overconsume, we know we want cuteness. Can we make it like its consumption less less harmful potentially?
That harm is like you're thinking about like material waste or
Yeah,
carbon,
yeah.
Embodied carbon or things like that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in a very loose sense, I'm no, you know, I'm no like sort of like sustainability theorist or expert, but I'm interested in the kind of aesthetic categories and aesthetic, maybe even protocols, aesthetic protocols that can actually affect an object's future viability. So how far into an object we imprint an aesthetic is quite important. So if it is a single kind of like sticker layer, it's less harmful than it is kind of complex form with kind of its aesthetic coming from the fact that it is that complex form that is like it might not be able to be reused again. I don't know, maybe it's because I don't have a very imaginative practice, like, and I really don't. I like the real factors. Maybe a good challenge for me would be to like imagine a future project where like it's all made of Hello Kitties, very complex, figuratively complex Hello Kitties. I don't know, but I tend to think that the wallpaper is more replaceable and reusable, replaceable than the sort of full Hello Kitty. Does that make sense as a
No, totally makes sense.
diagram? Okay.
So I'll shift now maybe to a question that's about newness, which I think is related to an idea about commodity and cuteness and how we kind of produce or generate desire. So maybe this is kind of folding together some student questions, but also a question that I have. So Munoz, you know, kind of calls on us to reject the here and now and try to, you know, move to the there and then that we can never reach, but we're always kind of aspiring to. And I feel, I guess, like identify in your work also a desire to kind of work on, I mean, new is the wrong word, right? So you're like walking a line, I guess, between a kind of recycled or resurfaced materiality, like the kind of repurposing of a thing for a new end.
Mm-hmm.
But through that, you're always also trying to produce a kind of new image or a new purpose, or like you're injecting a kind of newness to it. I think one of the questions from the students was like, if you're kind of rejecting the here and now and moving to the there and then, like, what do you leave behind, right? Like, I don't think any of us would advocate for tabula rasa. And to put it in like a really basic way, I mean, just your prompt about material reuse would say like, yeah, you need to begin with something you have. It's either it already exists on the shelf or it already exists in my home and I'm going to redo it, right? So it's not a tabula rasa. I guess it's just a kind of interesting question. Like, what do you, how much, and maybe for your practice in particular, like how much do you have to change in order for it to be a new instantiation of a thing, you know? Because
I mean, that's where like image comes in. I mean, image is like so powerful in like, you know, you can change the sort of I don't know, they're like you can put a sticker on something and change and like make it new, right? Like paint is like also so powerful that you can just kind of like change its color and make it new. So I think in that way, I don't know if this is answering your question, but it's a very calculated, when there is newness, it's a very kind of careful newness, right? Where do you apply that newness matters, because it either will affect the kind of the whole, or it will be affect a more kind of careful layer of the object. So I think about it a lot in like things always having like either parts or having layers. And so like the more on the surface you can affect change, the more it leaves for a kind of delamination and newness. Newness. I also, it's not necessarily, I mean, I love Munoz's text for its kind of disposition and its thinking about like more than what is present. It's not necessary. My practice does not necessarily reject the present. I think it's very much like sort of into it in terms of like how much it engages what's real or tries to, like, right? Like it's not establishing like my practice never happens in like imagine it's 2046 and like this and this are true. Like that's never the case. It's very much like within like whatever's down the street.
Right.
But it thinks about it in versions. So within any project, a future version of it is latent in the project. So even though that future version might not be either better or more desired, or never even come, a future version, and we're standing here on top of the kind of water one, which is like the exact project that could have been, never was, and it's still somehow like also the first project. Like it's still the gym, it's a different project, but it's like you know, differently themed, and the project was going to be, and then it's not going to be, and that's a kind of, I would consider that a kind of queer condition in a way, and it was always okay with that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's not about like rejecting the here and now. It's about rejecting the notion that the here and now is all there is. Right?
Correct. Right. And it does that through versions in most of the project, and then in other times through maybe, I don't know, like and I wrote a thing the other day trying to, and you know how much I love that, but I wrote a thing the other day trying to think about doing a mild theorization about what this kind of transmaterial condition might be, where it's like it's not necessarily a rejection of materiality or the use of image to show versions or speculating about the future, but it's like, what is a condition where the project is now, but you can also know that it's going to be future versions. So it's like materiality, that it's like in transition, or it's like it's already late, it already has a futurity like latent in it. So I'm interested in versions, but also in this kind of concept of maybe the transmaterial, the material in transition. Obviously I don't have like, you know, really good thoughts around it yet, as it kind of I just started thinking about this newly, but yeah, I'm interested in how versions are actually different than a transmaterial condition.
Well, we look forward to reading that text when you think.
Maybe like, yeah, 2046, that's the speculative project. Imagine it's 2046 and I finished this essay.
We are unfortunately out of time, but it was amazing to spend an hour with you and to see the work and to have a chance to discuss it. I have like 10 other questions in my Google Doc that I'll just email you, and I expect a one-page reply for each of them.
Maybe they'll help me with the essay.
Maybe they'll just really confuse you.
Ellie, what a treat! I get to spend a whole hour with Ellie talking about my work.
It was a treat.
Incredible. Yeah, what a treat.
So thank you to the students for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Big thanks to you, Laida. Appreciate your time. And also a shout out to Ethan and Paul, as always, in the background, making this possible. All right, so applause for Laida.
Teo says bye.
Bye, Teo. Oh my God.
Can you even see him? Let me see. I'm gonna give him a little green screen space. There he is. There he is.
Oh.
There. Go to the gym. Go to the gym, Teo.
All right. Bye, everybody.
All right. Bye, everyone.